Okay, so next installment of our series leading up to ICND 1 and then further on to CCNA. This one is about basic navigation of the Cisco IOS. The first video I did is just using Packet Tracer, and we're still in Packet Tracer. We don't have physical devices set up yet. We'll get to them, and I'll talk a bit about them actually today or now, but at the moment we're just looking at basic navigation of switches, so these little guys, and routers, because they are very, very similar. Most of the basic navigation and basic setup actually of both of these devices is identical. There is obviously subtle changes and differences between them because switches run certain protocols better than routers do, and will only run particular protocols that routers can't run, and routers could have inversely, I suppose, or vice versa, do their own thing. So yeah, basic configs. So I'm going to go in and just navigate the operating system of a Cisco device, and I'm all over the shop here, aren't I? So let's hit enter a whole bunch of times and get up to the screen that we'll normally get to right at the start. And well, at least if we don't have a startup config, which we will talk about a bit later. Excuse me. So when you first turn your switch on, you end up in this mode. This is called user mode. That little icon there, that greater than sign, says that we're in a place called user mode. And you will get questions on this, or you can expect to get questions on it. What can you do in this mode, what you can't do. You can put a password on this mode, because there is information that people would like to get if they particularly want to hack your system that you can obtain from this mode. From here, user mode, you cannot configure your device. You have to go in to a place called privilege exec mode. A long-winded name. We'll get there, but first let's look at user mode. We'll then get into privilege exec mode, and then config mode, and then other modes actually exist. So this session is about navigating where we are within this system. You need to get used to it, because there are different commands. So there's commands at this mode which will work at this mode, and they won't work in other modes. So work your way through the system and play a lot with these devices to really get used to this. It will save you hours and hours of pain and dread. Okay, so we've got access to this because there is no password set onto it. So what commands can we actually type in? We actually use the question mark. So I'll put a question mark in, and it pops up and gives us this set of commands. Now this set of commands here is limited. This is a packet tracer level of commands. If you physically connect to an actual switch, you'll get a lot more. But yeah, for a CCNA routing and switching, this is plenty enough. Actually more than enough. So that's good. Question mark is your friend. So let's use it a bit. So what do we want to do? Do we want to ping something? Do you want to show something? Do you want to telnet into another device? What do we want to do? Enable actually goes into our privilege command, so that we'll use that a little bit later. But for now, let's we're going to show. So if I type show, and I'm not too sure what I want to show, so I'll just hit enter, and it goes, well, it's an incomplete command. So what I'll do is hit the up arrow, because it does record what I typed in last. So I want to show or look at what options exist under the show command, and now I put a question mark again. So it's up there now. I've got show and question mark. And I can show all this stuff. I need to go wider again, make it all fit in. And this is not everything actually, I've got the more option down here. So if I hit my space bar rather than my down arrow, it'll complete it. Now there's only a couple of things that chucked in there, but anyway. So this is what I can show on this switch. So let me have a look at my MAC address table. It's a switch. Whoa, it typed quickly, didn't it? What the hell happened there? I've got show MAC-add. Now if you look at that, that's the first portion of that command that I've typed in. And then I hit tab. And this is pretty handy because it finishes my command for me. I actually don't have to finish it because there's no other word that is MAC-add or has anything like it. There is MAC up there, but not MAC-add. So I've now realized that there is actually a command if I tab it. So we can show the MAC address table. Let's just do that just to have a look. So at the moment it's saying, yep, there's one MAC address recorded on port 15 of that switch. Now that's something for later on. If I show MAC, now remember I have MAC, which is MAC confirmation, and MAC address table. There's two commands under the show command, and hit enter there. Again it says incomplete. So it starts to get a bit wild. Show MAC space question mark address table, a different way of writing the same thing that we had up there. So two commands doing the same thing for us. Put a question mark in there. Dynamic interface is static, or we can hit enter, carriage return. So there's a bit in that. So as we go through and look at stuff, we're using the question mark to find out what extra commands can we use. So if I want to show MAC, hit my tab after MAC-add, address table, put the question mark, is there anything else? Yep. I want to put static in there, is there anything else? No, there's no more options there. This option, or what extra commands could be, is dynamic, interfaces and static are the actual commands. So up here, show MAC address table static says, well that's the full command. Hit enter, there's actually nothing in there. So what do you know about MAC addresses MAC address tables at the moment? Well, maybe a bit, maybe nothing. That's not the point at the moment. The point is this question mark and these commands that we have. So there's a fair bit in there. Now let's have a look at our question mark again, and then we'll have a look at show again and put a question mark again there. I'm looking for something that'll make ourselves ambiguous. So we've got MAC address table, MLS, we've got CDP, clock and crypto. So let me just put the space bar. Let me put show C and hit enter there. Now this is an ambiguous command because now it says, well, there's three different options if you want to show C. You need to choose one. Now if I show CL, and this whole operating system always does this, and I use it a lot, to the point where I might be typing stuff in like a shorthand and it doesn't make sense. So CL, there's only one thing that starts with CL, so it'll actually show clock. So let's hit enter. There you go. We're living in the 90s now. March the 1st. So, and it's really early morning according to our clock. It's obviously wrong. but I've shortened the characters. So if I show CL, now I've shortened it even further, then it'll do the same thing. So we can shorten bits and pieces around. Okay, so get used to those options available. So there's I've chucked a few there at you. So anyway, let's be a bit more official now. There we're at user mode. If we type enable, and we can go to different levels, but we'll just hit enter because that gets us into level 15. Trust me on that one, it does. We are now in a thing called privilege exec mode. You can see the prompt has changed, and if we type show here, and I've just messed up myself and put a question mark, there's a lot more stuff for us. There's the same MAC address table, there's crypto, DHCP, Ether channel, flash. It's given us a lot more information, and again, this is on packet tracer. On physical gear, this will be 5 times as long. Actually, I'm exaggerating there, but anyway, it's longer. So normally at this level, we would actually show our information. So show our VLAN information. So we can have a look at that. Show VLAN brief. So again, I've just hit the tab. So I've used a shortened SH, typed in VLAN, and I just typed in BR, which I didn't actually have to hit the tab, but I did just to show us it's completing. Show VLAN brief, hit enter, and this is our VLAN information on the switch, which is something we'll learn to manipulate later on. But we're using commands to get information from our switch. So this is privilege exec mode. Ooh, I've still got Bob in there. I've created that VLAN last time, didn't I? I didn't clean it out. There you go. Bad. Always clean your stuff. Okay. Next mode is config mode. So config terminal is the option to get into that. And hit enter there. And you can see again our prompt has changed. This is config mode. That's privilege exec mode. And way back here, that is user mode. So get a feel for where you are around this system. If we go in and actually want to configure an interface, then we go to interface VLAN 99. We can, and we should spell things correctly, shouldn't we? Maybe I used shorthand too often. So interface VLAN 99, hit enter there. We're now in actually configuring the interface mode. There's the IF there. If I type in interface, whoops, VLAN 100, and hit enter, don't worry about that too much. You'll notice that the prompt hasn't changed from what we had before. So you have to be a bit careful and know exactly where you are. Previously, I was configuring interface VLAN 99. Now I'm actually configuring the interface VLAN 100. But the prompt hasn't changed. So be a bit careful of that. Okay, so part of our navigation, I want to get back. So if I type exit, E-X-I-T, well done. I go back one level. I can keep hitting exit, I can hit up and down arrows. Let me go into VLAN 100 again. I will type in Control Z. Now that gets me straight back to privilege exec mode. That's normally as far back as you can go with Control Z. If you exit this, it goes back to user mode. And there's no history, no enable there. So we'll type enable to get back into privilege exec. Configure terminal gets us into config mode. So don't forget these: user mode, privilege exec mode, config mode. Handy things to do. Okay, so what can we do? I mean, in config mode we start configuring things, so like our interfaces, like our ports, VLANs, whatever it is that we actually need to do. Generally we will find it in config mode, so let's put a question mark there and we'll go right down. So now we've got quite a number of things to play with. We can actually configure our clock to actually have different times. We can configure the MAC address table, not just look at it. We can put in different services, and the one we'll be playing with later is about passwords and all the rest. So there's a bit we can play with that. I've Control Z'd, I've gone back to privilege mode, or privilege exec mode, sorry. Now, while we're running this, a switch and a router are pretty much PCs. They're computers. They load up. A bootstrap process goes through, checks are done. Eventually the operating system, which in our case is called iOS, is loaded up, and then a startup configuration file is read and stored in a thing called running config. So if we were to configure different bits and pieces in here, so let's quickly go there, configure terminal. Ooh, just lost those as well. So interface VLAN 100. So see, I've used short int VL100, and now I'm configuring VLAN 100. I can put an IP address in here, 172.20.0.1, 255.255.0.0, and I have added configuration to my system. So I might want to look at this configuration and understand what's actually going on. So from my privilege exec mode, and even from user mode, I can look at this file. Which is show running config. Obviously I can't talk and type at the same time, but the running config is what's stored in RAM. And this is it. So the show running config shows what my host name is. That hasn't changed. These commands, what version of iOS I'm running, and what configuration I have on my interfaces. Now again, I've got more, so use the space bar. All my interfaces are down there. It's a 24 port, well, it's actually a 26 port switch because it's got 24 ports which are fast Ethernet and 2 ports which are gigabit Ethernet. Hit the space bar even further down and I've got more information. So there's a built-in interface VLAN 1. I've added interface VLAN 99 and did not put an IP address on it. I added an interface VLAN 100 and put that IP address. So this is nice to know. We will get to these soon, but I've put an IP address. I've got configuration in there. So while the switch is up and running, this is the information that's going to be read or used, and that's good. But if we want to keep this information, we need to save our running config to a thing called startup config. Now if I show my startup, let's finish it, startup config, and I hit enter there, it says it's not present. So what I really need to do if I want this saved is to copy my running config to startup config, and I'm so used to shortcuts, it's not funny these days, but anyway, that's the full line. That will save what is in RAM and store it into a config file that will be read when this thing first boots up. So a good thing to do unless you're testing things out. Now we can do that, and it's saved as startup config. So if I now show startup config, so show startup config and hit enter, same as my running config, exactly the same. Yeah, good. Now this is actually configure terminal. Conf T will get you there. So config terminal, if I now change something else, so let me create a host name, switch 1, and that's changed. So we've seen this before in the previous video if you watched it. And now my running config and startup config are different. If I show my running config, I now have a host name switch 1, and if I show my startup config, my host name is switch. So if this switch is turned off and on or rebooted, reloaded, then we will keep this startup config, but we'll not keep the host name that we just put into the running config. So it's only stored in RAM. So be a bit careful of that when you're building everything. Generally, once you're happy with everything that's on your switch, you will save your running config as a startup config. If you are playing around and you're not too sure if this is going to work or not work, and you put your commands in and it all fails in a screaming heap, you just reload your switch to the original startup config and you're back to square one. Or you negate all your commands. We should talk about negation, shouldn't we? So let's go conf T again. I said hostname switch 1 previously, but I don't want hostname switch 1. So I can say no to things, and I can say no to everything that actually exists here. So there's no question mark. So if I say no hostname and hit enter, then I just go back to the default. So sometimes, and most times, that you just want to delete a single command that you don't like, then put no in front of it. Why you would not want a hostname, I don't know, but anyway, all good. So using your up arrow, we can just go and create one there anyway. If you want to change your hostname, then just write straight over it. So sometimes you can write straight over different configs, other times not. Okay, so let's Control Z again. Now, the copy run config to startup config is long-winded. So what you can do is type in write, and that'll do the same thing. That has actually built all your configuration files. If you want to delete that startup config, actually if we show startup config now, you can see it, the host name is the current one. So if I want to delete the whole thing, I can erase startup config. That's one option. And erasing the NVRAM file system to remove all configuration files. Continue. Yep. So this is a handy thing. Startup config is stored in NVRAM, which is called non-volatile RAM. So that's good. We can clean it up that way. The other way to clean it up is write erase. And exactly the same thing, but there's nothing in there. Last little bit, or 2 bits actually, let's type in a directory, dir. That gives us a couple of bits of information in this directory. This is the directory of flash flash is kind of a non-volatile RAM. It's like a USB stick, but it's done differently here. That thing there, that C2960 LAN base MZ122-25fx.bin is your operating system. It's a binary. It's compressed as well. 12.2. We also have this file called VLAN.dat. So just typing in dir for directory, we can see that we have what is in flash and actually NVRAM. Now normally when we finish using our devices we should tidy up, and we need to delete VLAN.dat and our startup config. So we've deleted our startup config there. We now need to delete VLAN.dat. So delete VLAN.dat, hit enter. Be sure it's VLAN.dat. Yep. And let's have a look at our directory again. VLAN.dat's gone. We know it's gone, so we've got no VLAN information in there anymore. We've also wiped out our startup config, so by resetting or reloading this device we're back to factory default, which is good. Last little bit to show is to show version, and this is kind of handy sometimes. Now there's our same 12.2 25fx is the version, C2960 is the version of iOS that we're running. Again down there, and it gives us other bits of information, how much memory we've got, how we're playing around with it, I suppose. But yeah, it does have a config register as well, which is handier in routers. So let's now reload, because we want to reset this back to factory default. We want to confirm it. It starts booting up. Let's just fast forward time a bit, come back to that, and there we are. If we show running config here, true? Oh, of course it won't. Will it? Because we're in user mode. Show running config. Version 12.2. Our host name is switch, and there's no interface VLAN 99 or interface VLAN 100 that we had before. So that's the way we want our switch every time we play with it. We want it nice and clean, so every time you're in class or every time you're using physical stuff in a learning environment, just clean up everything, your VLAN.dat and your startup config. And that's about it for the basic navigation of your iOS. Practice that stuff so that it becomes second nature.